with Antonia Majaca for HYPER Annotations 3.0 triple ampersand's public program. Antonia is the curator of the Croatian Pavilion at this year's Venice Biennale, which is titled By the Means at Hand. I wanted to ask you about this title basically because, as I understand it, this is a show largely about diaspora, so I wanted to ask how the title relates to that theme.
Right. I think the main inspiration for Vlatko Horvat, who is the artist of the pavilion, was actually something that, although, dispersed, planetarily dispersed, but I would say anthropologically universal, which is the alternative logistics people who live outside the countries where they were born have to employ as means of survival, but often also as a form of joy.
Yes.
So some of you and some of us know the situations where a mother sends you, a bowl of hot, warm food through a bus going through different countries. In the Balkans for sure, that is a very present, very, very common practice. So by alternative means, or by the means at hand, is actually referring to this type of alternative logistics, obviously, but also logistics that very often resides on something we could call institutionalization of friendship, on trustfulness. Very often you give something to a person that you might even not know so well, to give it to someone else in a different country. So in this sense, we are using this type of, so to say, conceptual tool to really think about how we can work with the means that we have at hand, which doesn't necessarily mean DIY, but simply meaning not being precious about your means and just simply as a kind of almost a feminist praxis, working with what is available and making the best out of it, right? So on one hand, that is an obvious kind of, generative potential, metaphoric and generative potential of that title. But it also points, I think, to this broader topic or more fundamental premise, which is trustfulness. Because essentially, Vlatko Horvat invited artists from all over the world who are in her friend base to contribute their original small-scale artwork, that are artworks that are works on paper, primarily, that are two-dimensional, that are A4 or A3, it can be also A5, but small-scale, two-dimensional works that can fit into people's suitcases and pockets and travel by alternative and means and by the means at hand. In that sense, it's also interesting that the status of the artwork creates a premise, the artwork creates a premise for a spontaneous production of social relation, because you actually have to meet the person in order to take the work, to take it to the next person, who might then take it to a next person, and then finally arrive here in the Croatian Pavilion in Venice. So it's a very subtle framework, but within this kind of relatively predetermined framework, there's a lot of space for humor, for kind of excess of sociality that we are then somehow exhibiting also in the pavilion. So all of those things that you normally don't see in the production of exhibitions, you actually see it here.
Right.
So you see the logistics behind it, this kind of like very awkward, even kind of, like the weirdest possible logistics. Normally exhibitions are made in most efficient way, where you like take something from point A to point B by art transport, you pay a lot of money, you produce a lot of carbon footprint to bring the artwork from, wherever to Venice, which is obviously completely, and needless to say, completely unsustainable mode of doing exhibitions. So I think this project is in that way also producing a critical intervention in the way that exhibitions of this scale and this format are normally made, but not through, let's say, directly critiquing that model, but just doing its own thing. So that's the beauty of this project. So in a sense, the exhibition is also a set of kind of material remainders of that social process of artistic exchange. So the artist is here the entire time of the biennial. She lives in the pavilion, and she has a little workstation, and she's producing her collages. So every time you come to the space, you see a set of collages that she's making at the moment, which are on the opposite side of the original works that we're receiving here. So she's sending her collages and receiving the works from abroad. And you see everything in the same time, and then it all dissipates. So it's kind of an exhibition that rematerializes and dematerializes all the time.
Yes.
Sorry, that was a long
No,
answer.
no, that's fine. That's great.
By the means that I have.
Yes, yes. No, but Antonia, I really wanted to ask you. So usually, or rather, usually, I would ask people. So how does this theme relate to the larger theme of the Venice Biennale, which is foreigners everywhere? But you know, I think for here, it's quite clear, quite obvious, and you know, people often, you know, their general theme is sort of tangential to the idea of foreigners everywhere. But you tackled it quite directly. So why is that? Why did you tackle it so pragmatically or directly? Or what do you think?
I think the answer is kind of maybe residing in a very basic fact that both Vlatka and myself, we also live in diaspora, even though you know, it's very hard to identify with any form of national identity for us, especially coming from socialist Yugoslavia that turned into numerous little countries formed last Thursday. Not really, but new countries, new nation states. So it's a kind of also a logical kind of outcome of that experience, but also from the kind of unease coming with the idea that we would be representing a nation state, both her and me as a curator. So I think the only way to participate in the National Pavilion in Venice Biennale for the two of us was to kind of dismantle that idea that we are also foreigners and that we are always foreigners, right? Of course, there's a different, there are many different ways of being foreigner, as you know. So it's not the same. It's not the same thing to be a foreigner. You know, there are privileged forms of foreigners. There are expats, and there are migrants, and there are refugees, and there are, you know, there are many different ways of you can inhabit that particular kind of fragile identity of being a foreigner. But yes, in a way, it did come from that kind of idea that we cannot actually represent a nation state, rather than responding to the theme of the biennial. No?
Yes, but regardless, I must ask you, how would you place this year's Croatian pavilion amongst the previous Croatian pavilions at the Venice Biennale, if at all, perhaps not?
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't really. No. I mean, I think there have been some absolutely amazing projects presented in the context of the Croatian pavilion at Venice Biennale. Igor Grubic, curated by Katarina Gregos, so last edition's project by Tomas Savic-Gecan, which was curated by Elena Filipovic, which was very dematerialized. It was a choreographic piece, very ephemeral, very radical in many ways. So Croatian Pavilion didn't actually have a physical space. So I think the Croatian Pavilion is kind of profiling itself for relatively radical gestures, I guess. And this one, for certain, is a radical gesture because it's not catering to the expectations of the spectacular opening. Rather, we are accumulating the exhibition as we go, and you know, the works will keep coming in the next 8 months, and it's rather unspectacular. It's just like it's kind of like basically tracing this circulation of people, access of you know. Of this type of interaction, and in a way it's also a critical intervention, or you could say even kind of institutional critique by other means, no? It's saying we're not interested, you know, in what is expected. In a way, it's kind of like Vlatka Horvat once phrased it in the interview that we did for the reader that we produced for this project. She said, you know, we are actually kind of responding to as if we are not understanding the task, you know? As if we on purpose don't understand what's expected from us in this context. You know?
And how do you see your role as a curator in making such a critical intervention or a radical gesture?
Right. Well, I think the most radical gesture for me here is that I have no idea what I'm exhibiting before I see it, because the things arrive in packages and I don't look into the packages to decide whether we're going to show them or not. And, you know, a couple of years ago, I wrote about kind of something that I called at that point, it was more kind of a provocation. I called it against curating as endorsing. And I think I was just making this joke this morning that actually comes full circle, because I'm really, I have no idea what's in those packages, right? So I'm kind of like, I'm not endorsing individual artists and artworks, but the whole kind of premise of the project is so beautiful and such a radical, but at the same time, such an elegant, subtle gesture. So I really love the project every day more and more, So, yeah.
And do you have anything to say about this, or these sort of aesthetics of the archive, of the packaging and the provenance and the email and so forth? And there's also this, there's so much to look at, but at the same time, this so much is something itself to look at. So is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah. Well, you see, I think that there is a kind of a resonance with some of the, late 60s, early 70s conceptual art of a certain kind, I would say, mail art, but not the kind of the clean, geometric kind of, I wouldn't say sterile, but the kind of the white conceptualism of the first, global north or whatever. This maybe resonates more with some of the tactics of apartment art, art in the basements, art in the windows, kind of the dirty political conceptualism of Eastern Europe or, Latin America, for example. And I think in that sense, it kind of maybe formally, I guess that's what you're trying to ask, like formally it does have a little bit of that.
Yes.
And I think it does resonate with those practices that kind of introduced, parallel methods of coming together, of kind of forms of gathering through art, And in a way, yes, archive, it is an archive. Primarily it is. We are creating an archive rather than a collection, even though, yes, we are also curating a collection and creating a collection of small-scale diasporic collection, small-scale art that are somehow documenting and archiving the moment in this kind of diasporic existences of artists around the world. But that collection that we are gathering, and by the way, of course, we are creating a collection with zero capital, like it's all based on artistic exchange. So at the end, it's probably going to be a very large collection of artists who all live in diaspora, but that kind of the material residue, the artworks are again just going to be part of that, experience of interaction and exchange, and will become an archive where the logbooks and the hands exchanging packages and the works, Vlatka's works that might arrive in Ghana or France or I don't know where, are then exhibited in galleries or, shop windows or people's studios in their respective places. That's all part of that archive. And what I think is very interesting in that respect, and thank you for that question, actually made me think about that, how, the actual assembly that you see here is an assembly of both, people and their interactions, artists, people who bring works, people who take works back, and then the actual artworks that are inside, so it's a kind of a gathering of very heterogeneous entities coming together, where the artworks are also just one part of the whole assembly.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we like to end on a bit of like a light question.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you, are there any pavilions or shows that you're particularly looking forward to seeing, or perhaps ones that you've already seen but you found very interesting or good or just notable maybe?
I haven't seen a lot, I have to say. I have to be quite honest. I quite liked the way I was puzzled by the Icelandic pavilion. I thought that was so kind of confusing in a good way, and I thought, oh, I don't understand what this is, and I like it, and I intuit that once I get what it is, I'm really gonna like it. So I have to go back to figure out what that is properly.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not a good answer.
No, it's a great answer. I
don't know if it's a recommendation to go there, but
Perhaps.
I quite like also, I have to say, the sound installation at the Italian pavilion with Kali Malone and Caterina Barbieri, the artist. So that was, I think, quite special as well. Yeah.
Super. Thank you so much, Antonia.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks.